prohibition of crossbreeding animals, and in essence, crossbreeding, of course, with plants, with trees, we call it grafting plants, trees. The underpinnings of all of this is the same concept, which is God gave us a world. God gave us a beautiful world. God gave us a world as He wills it. And when we start crossbreeding animals or crossing the production of the various fruit trees, we're changing His world in a way that He doesn't want us to. And therefore, there are prohibitions. There are many prohibitions for Jews. There are prohibitions for Noahides as well. Some things that are forbidden for Jews, Noahides can do, but there are definitely many prohibitions for Noahides as well in this concept. Interesting, you could say, where in the 7 Noahide laws does this come under? Actually, any ideas where it comes under? Where would that be in the Noahide laws? What would be a subcategory of?
Possibly not eating the limb of an animal, but
Exactly. No, that's exactly true.
Oh,
Because under that is in general the concept of not being cruel to animals, being treating animals appropriately, and similarly being respectful of each animal of what its type is, and not crossing it and trying to modify or change how God created the animal. And from the prohibition of crossbreeding animals, the next branch of that is crossbreeding, grafting fruit trees. So crossbreeding fruit trees comes from crossbreeding animals, and crossbreeding animals comes from, as Dixie got it right away, this injunction for us to not be cruel to animals, to not eat, of course, as we know, the flesh of a living animal, and in general, proper care of animal life and proper respect for God's world.
so we went from animals to the trees. So what about the food of the ground? Because I know they do cross those sometimes. Is that prohibited?
So for a Noahide, no. For a Noahide, the only prohibition is crossing 2 types of fruit trees, or what they would call a fruit vine with a fruit tree, which could be like a tomato vine with a fruit tree. That would be considered crossing. Prohibition against mating different species. So again, why do we have all these prohibitions? This is God's world, and He created the animals as He wills them to be. And He doesn't want man to say, I can make a better version. I can take this and make a new version, and it'll improve on God's creation. God said, not in that way do I want you to start modifying my creation. I created the world, and I want the animals to be as the animals are. I want the trees to be as the trees are. Enjoy what I gave you. Don't try to change it. We are not allowed to literally mate 2 different species of animals together. This does not only apply because the animals will produce this new hybrid animal. Even if you know for sure that there's no chance that a child will be produced from this union, you're also not allowed to have a union of 2 different types of animals. Again, this is God's world. We respect the world as He made it, and we're not trying to change and modify His world.
Unfortunately, you see it quite happening, though, quite often, because they have been crossing, they've crossed horses with zebras, and of course with the donkeys and the mules, and they're sterile. Not all of them, no. But, and there's a few other things they've crossed horses with that you really is prohibited that they do.
Absolutely. Anything that God says no to probably means someone's trying to do it.
You got it. You got it.
If God said no and be like, that's such a weird no, why would anyone even think to do that? No, something's off. Anything God says no to, a definition, there's somebody out there that wants to do it. That's for sure, because God knows us, He made us, and if He's a prohibition, it's because we have a desire to do something we're not supposed to do. So we are saying it's forbidden to crossbreed animals if you know, or the goal is that they should produce an offspring, a hybrid, or if you know there won't be any offspring produced. You're still forbidden to crossbreed them. You're forbidden to physically put the 2 animals together. You are also perhaps forbidden, it's not as clear, you're not physically putting the 2 of them together, but you know you're putting them in a situation like you're putting them in a pen where they're there together, and it's very likely that on their own they're going to have a relationship. Some say that's permissible because you're not actually physically mating them. Some say it's still forbidden, and therefore we go on the side of caution, and we wouldn't do that either. Now, if you put two animals in a pen, and in your head there's no way they would mate, and they do, that is not considered a transgression on your part, because you never envisioned anything would happen. You didn't try, you weren't looking for it, and you didn't envision it. So that's okay. But if you knew there was a possibility, then no. Even if you're not doing anything, you can't do it. This applies to your own animals. This applies to doing it for someone else's animals. This applies to someone else doing it for your animals. On any possible level, it's forbidden. And why is it forbidden? Because God made his world. This is God's world. This is as God wants his world to be. And God made horses. God made donkeys. God didn't make mules. If he wanted to make mules, he would have. He didn't. So therefore, we don't. Now, if someone did crossbreed, like we're saying, maybe it was completely an accident, or maybe they transgressed. In either case, you are allowed to use that animal once it's already born. Question is, what about that animal? How can that animal mate? What is it permitted to mate with? The only permissible mating of a hybrid animal is with exactly the same hybrid. What do I mean by exactly the same hybrid? So Dixie said, I thought mules were sterile. You're saying mules aren't sterile necessarily?
They are, but every now and then there's one that isn't. Not very often.
So interesting. So let's say you had a horse and a donkey produced a mule. Forbidden, but it happened. Can you mate that mule with another mule? Not necessarily. They can only be mated with an animal that was produced exactly as they were. Meaning, if it was a female horse with a male donkey, that mule can only be bred, mated, with a mule produced by a female horse with a male donkey. Well, let's say by the other mule, it was a male horse with a female donkey. No, that's considered two different species. Cannot mix them. It has to be literally exactly the same. Literally exactly the same for there to be a mating of this product, of this hybrid with any other animal. Can this mule or hybrid of the horse and the donkey mate with a horse or mate with a donkey? No way. It's different species. Only with another mule, and only with a mule with the same lineage, the same parental lines as this one. It applies to all hybrids. Well, let's say you don't know. Dixie, what else did you say did they mate horses with?
Zebras.
Zebras.
Yeah.
Can that offspring produce offsprings?
I do not know. I've never heard whether they can or can't. They're very pretty, um, but they say they're and this is I've heard that they're pretty untrainable. That's what I heard.
But they don't roam the wilds of Colorado, probably only of like Africa, so you don't know.
Well, only that. I mean, they're just so expensive. They're such a rarity, and they are quite. I mean, a lot of people. Some people want them, and so the price of them is big,
astronomical.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
And you've never tried to train one. You never had that experience.
No. Nope.
Have you ever trained a product of a horse and another animal?
Mules. Jack trained a mule.
Yeah.
So, and mules are exceptionally talented animals. And if, like, when you go hunting, and when we went hunting, I always wanted the mule because he was so much sure-footed than the horse. I mean, they are so sure-footed. It's unbelievable.
So let's say, again, I'm moving away from the mule because I don't know why people wouldn't mate mules if mules don't produce children anyway. But let's say this horse zebra does produce offspring. So we said, well, if the mother is a horse and the father is a zebra, it can only mate with another animal whose mother is a horse and father is a zebra. Now, let's say you don't know. You have your own lineage, pedigreed, mom horse, dad zebra hybrid. There's another hybrid, but you don't know its pedigree. You don't know its lineage. You don't know, is this a perfect match or not? So what are you allowed to do? So the sages say, look at it closely. And you're analyzing it, you see that the features of this hybrid match the one you have, whatever, mother horse, father zebra, then you can assume that it has the same lineage and they can mate. Because, and this is very interesting, but the sages are saying if it was the opposite, if mother was a zebra and the father was a horse, it would look different. And that's why it's a different species. And that's why they can't mate. So if you're matching and actually the features of your hybrid matches this other hybrid, and you don't know its pedigree, you don't know its lineage, you can assume it's the same as yours and you can mate those animals. So that's interesting because who would think the mother or the father would actually make a difference in the hybrid? But the sages say, no, it does. And that's why you can't mate them unless it's the exact same pedigree, the exact same lines of the father and the mother in terms of the specific species.
I think I can tell you why, possibly. It's because the mare is 51% of the horse, of the colt. So that's probably one of the reasons.
What do you mean? You're saying the mare gives more?
Yeah, she gives 51%. The stallion only gives 49%.
So you're saying in essence, and you think this, in essence, you're saying whoever the mother line is, that's going to more influence the hybrid than the father line.
Correct.
And that's why it would produce a slightly different hybrid.
Correct.
So interesting. Wow. I never knew that.
I think that would be the case. People want mules because they have a purpose. They are so sure-footed. They can pull big loads. There's a lot of they call them monster mules. They're big as draft horses, and so they're for working, and so that's why they are sought after animals, because they are very, you can work them, and they work harder. From what I understand, they can outwork a horse, and yeah, so that's why people want mules.
Does people have like mule farms?
Oh yeah. Oh
Okay.
yeah. Yeah.
That's all they do is, well, how would they breed a mule if a
They
mule
don't. They don't breed the mules. It comes from the cross of the donkey.
Oh,
So they would be breeding the donkey, not the mule. But then you'll produce the mule between the donkey and the horse produces the mule.
So that's so interesting because our sages say, and they don't view a donkey and a horse as very similar, but even animals that they do view as very similar, they say it's still forbidden. Like, for example, like a wolf and a dog, where they view that as much more similar species, but they say still it's forbidden. Mountain sheep and a domesticated sheep, which are actually two different species, but very similar, they say, no, you still can't do it. Domesticated donkey and a wild donkey, they say, no. Actually interesting, this concept of wild and domesticated, because for some species, the sages say that line, wild and domesticated, are similar enough, they can mate. Other lines, wild and domesticated, are not similar enough and they cannot mate.
I can understand the wolf and the dog not being able to mate, because the wolf, being wild has instincts of the wild, and they're not going to change. Those instincts are always going to be there. So they're a dangerous animal. We have people that have had wolf dogs, and they're very touchy, because they've got that instinct to kill. They've got the
wolf part.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So they say a domesticated ox and a wild ox, you can mate. A domesticated horse and a wild horse, you can mate. But other animals, the wild and domesticated version, you cannot mate because they say, no, it's like a different species. Domesticated donkey and a wild donkey, you cannot mate. They say, no, that's not considered the same species, but a horse and a wild horse, you could.
Yeah.
Or an ox and a wild ox, you could. So I guess, and again, maybe Dixie would have some understanding on why the horses, wild and domesticated, are still considered the same species, but the donkeys, wild and domesticated, are not considered the same species.
The horses I can see, because they all came from domesticated animals. That they are wild horses, but they came from the
They originally
conquistadors, or what? Yeah,
they
because
say in terms of dogs, some species of wild dogs can mate with regular dogs, and some species cannot. And I think this goes back to what you were saying about the wolf and the dog. That some wild dogs are like, whoa, ferocious animals, they really are. And no, those aren't like regular dogs. And our sages are saying, those you can't, but some you can. So if you really were in this business or had a need, it would be really speaking to a rabbi to understand which wild domesticated species are considered close enough to be the same species and which are not. And you can't cross-make them.
This is very interesting, because look at these pit bulls nowadays.
Mm.
Another one just killed somebody, his own that he raised. That would be a domesticated animal that has been taught to kill and has stayed in with them. And now, if you would make a wolf with that, you could get a very, very dangerous animal.
A very dangerous animal.
Man,
A very dangerous animal. So they
yeah.
say like it's not clear among the sages wild goats and domesticated goats. Some say it's okay, some say it's not, so therefore we don't do it. They say a buffalo is not the same as a domesticated ox, and therefore we do not. And they say a pig and a wild boar, which we would view as a wild pig, is not, and therefore we do not crossbreed a domesticated pig with a wild pig. We do not crossbreed a buffalo that's considered like a wild ox with a domesticated ox. We do not crossbreed a wild goat with a domesticated goat, but we do a wild horse with a domesticated horse.
Yeah, because they came from the conquistadors.
Mm-hmm.
They were never really here as wild.
Domesticated duck and a wild duck, which actually, they say if you actually look at them biologically, you can see they're really two different species, even though they're both considered a duck.
Mm-hmm.
But this is domesticated, this is wild. They're actually different species, and you actually cannot cross.
Now, I know that some people make like miniature versions, like miniature goats. Some of the other, instead of the full scale size goat, but make it into like a miniature goat. And that, now, is that permissible?
I don't know
I'm
because I
just
don't know how they
curious
do it. That's very interesting. I don't know what they do to the animal to do that.
to make it miniature.
Right. If
Now,
they're crossbreeding it to make it a smaller version, then it would be forbidden. Now, once okay, so really Linda's going in a good direction. Someone else sinned. Someone else made the mule. That's forbidden. Once there's a mule, is Dixie allowed to use that mule and ride on it because it's more sure-footed than a horse? Absolutely. You're totally allowed to use it. You're not allowed to make it. So if someone else made this miniature goat that you thought was so sweet and so adorable and cute, or whatever other reason you wanted a miniature goat, they maybe sinned. But you are allowed to use the product of that crossbreeding, even though they were not allowed to do it. Even the person themselves. Obviously, if they're selling it, they're gaining benefit from it. But if they want to keep it, they're allowed to keep it. Like, it's forbidden to do. And once you did it, you're allowed to use it, which doesn't take away its status as being forbidden. So it's not like Dixie should say, well, if I'm really God-fearing, how could I use this mule if God doesn't want? God didn't want it to be made. Once it's made, you're 100% allowed to use it. No problem whatsoever.
I'm not sure the miniature goats are crossbreeding because I think they come from the goats. They're just, you keep crossing down. In other words, you get a goat that's small, and then there's somebody else has a small goat, and you go down and down and down until finally that whole line is only small goats that you're breeding.
That could be like how they're breeding the red heifers in Texas. They're breeding the red heifers, and they keep, when again, that's totally permissible. They're within the same species, but they just are looking at the parental coloring. They keep breeding and breeding together to get this perfectly red heifer. And that's totally
And that
permissible.
would be the same thing with a goat or a cow. They breed miniature cows. They're really cute. And miniature ponies and I mean, they're awesome and they're great pets.
now, when it comes to, like, as you can see the picture of my dog, she's a crossbreed between a Shih Tzu and a Bushan. I got her that way, and those are two dogs. So
Which
would
is
that
totally
be
fine. That's totally
fine?
fine. Yeah,
Okay.
that's totally fine. That's not considered a problem. 100% not considered a problem. They're both dogs, so it's not a problem. This type of dog with this type of dog, not a problem at all. Even if it was a problem, as we're saying, you still could benefit from it. Because if, like we're saying, Dixie can ride the mule, it's not a problem at all. Well, she's God-fearing. How could she ride a mule? She's a Noahide. How could she ride a mule? The other person was wrong in making the mule. She's allowed to purchase it. She's allowed to buy it. She's allowed to use it. She has one. She's allowed to raise it. None of those things are problems. You just, it's tremendous transgression to make it. But once it was born, even the owner of it who made it can feel free to use it, though the producing of it was a absolute transgression. The concept of crossbreeding does not apply with birds, like a mother bird sitting on a different types of birds' eggs. We don't view that as crossbreeding because she's not producing them. She's just warming them so then they can hatch, and they will be whatever that bird originally was. Nothing to do with this mother bird that's warming the nest and allowing those birds to develop. But in terms of animals, it is a real transgression, but we are allowed to use them. And we will stop at this point. And thank you, Dixie, for the
Thank
extra
you.
knowledge. As I was
Thank you.
preparing today, I was like, okay, Dixie's going to help us out here tonight. I knew that. So I'm glad you showed up to make sure you helped us out. And God